So people have often asked me to make a video on my creative process when writing a piece of music. The other day my wife suggested this too. And if my wife, who's my most ardent critic, suggests something, I tend to run with it. So here goes. So as a professional, I usually have two main points of departure, or motivation if you like, for writing music. The first is in my professional capacity being commissioned to write and being given a brief as to what is required. So a client comes and says, I need to make a piece of music about this and it must sound like that. The second is in my personal capacity as a musician and a composer, where I'm authentically creative from a place of inspiration, where there's no brief, there's no specific purpose, and there's no deadline. This video deals with the latter, where I'm going to write and produce an original piece of music which will hopefully go on my next album. There are many ways to start out composing a piece of music. I'm obviously not a singer-songwriter, so I never start with the words really. I'm always starting with musical melody, rhythm, or harmony, or chords, textures, things like that. Here are some examples. Sitting and playing at the piano. This is probably my most common starting point. I spend time just practicing or having a quiet time or just jamming for my own enjoyment. Often when I'm doing this, a melody or a chord sequence will pop up. When that happens, I grab my mobile phone and I record it. So I've got it memorized. Another way would be jamming on my synthesizers. Sounds, textures can be very inspirational. I often write a song from a bass line or even a drum loop. It's very important for me to state that there's no formula, and I avoid trying to find one. Always stay outside the box. Always approach something new as something completely new. Okay, so let's get started. As I said, the most usual process for me is to be sitting at the piano and playing, whether it's a jam session or a practice session or a quiet time. And obviously, I think very importantly, to have a device handy. There are lots of options. There are various kinds of audio recorders, but I just use my voice recorder on my cell phone, so it's fairly straightforward. If you've got the space on your device, I would just say, when you play, record. Record everything you do, even if you turf it all away, because you might just get something that just comes and it's exactly what you need and you've at least got it captured. What I normally do though is I just jam on, and when I find something that grabs me, I just quickly hit the record on my device and just replay that little section because it's fresh enough to remember. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be basically having a little jam session with myself, and hopefully an idea will come out and I'll then use that as the foundation for my new composition. There's something. Okay, so that can work. So what I do is I record that little piece, take it over to my studio, and develop it from there. Okay, so let's recap quickly. I sat at the piano and I played, and eventually I came across a good idea. I grabbed my mobile phone and I recorded the idea onto my phone. Then I come across to my studio and I opened up my digital audio workstation. In this case I'm using Cubase. I open up a new project on my workstation, and then I record my rough recording from my mobile phone onto a spare track on my new project. It's always good to have a cup of tea nearby. Never forget the tea. Tea's good. So having transferred my rough recording from my mobile phone onto Cubase, I then played through a number of times to familiarize myself with what I've done, to internalize it, and to even allow it to crystallize and to inspire additional ideas for it. I then write down the chords and other notes needed so that I can reference it as I work ahead. Once I've practiced what I've done a number of times, I then establish the tempo, which is in this case 85 beats per minute, and then I replay what I've done in time with the click track onto Cubase. So I have a more solid and definite guide track to work from. So here's what we have so far. So you can hear I've got the piano in time with the metronome, so that now gives me a solid foundation from where to work. So in many ways, building a piece of music is just like building a house. I started with the piano and I came up with a plan. I then brought the plan across to the building site and used that plan to lay a foundation and to put up scaffolding. The foundation being the tempo and feel, and the scaffolding being the guide piano, which will probably not stay in the song. It's unlikely it'll stay in the song. It's probably not going to be a piano song at all. Thereafter we start the building, which is the arrangement, the structure, the shape, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, blah blah blah. And thereafter we do the finishing touches, the cladding and the paintwork, where we decide the textures, the moods, the kind of sound we want to have, the kind of message we want to put across, the things that make our song or a piece of music unique and different, the feeling we want to give it, the colour, the shape, the mood. So having worked with the 8 bars of piano that I came up with originally, I eventually took it further and built another section to it, a bridge or a chorus if you like, and that sounds, and basically I came up with this. So now I have 2 sections which I've cobbled together to have basically a verse section and a chorus section and then a repeat of the verse section, and I've built the song. At this point it might be worthwhile saying that a lot of music these days is built in a very modular fashion, assembling loops like Lego blocks. I'm quite old school. I still see a piece of music having a bit more of a story to it. I like there to be a beginning and an end and a story in between that doesn't necessarily consist of lots of repetition. But having said that, a good repetitive theme, a good groove, a good rhythmic component that repeats is not necessarily a bad thing. I just like to think of my songs or my pieces of music in a more linear fashion than in a modular fashion. So now that I've laid the piece out on piano, I've listened to it a number of times and I'm starting to work out what kind of sound I want to give it. Obviously what I do with it now has to be relevant to what I have already. One must be careful not to try and be too clever or try too hard to be different, because that hardly ever works. So you start to mold it in a specific direction. Is it a jazz piece? Is it a rock piece? Is it electronic? Is it acoustic? Is it orchestral? And be patient. Take your time. Not that it has to be pigeonholed into any specific genre. Be careful not to make too much of a formula of what you're doing. Just go with the flow. I'm looking at the bass for this song. The bass sound, the bass feel, the bass texture. And I'm feeling right now that I want to go with the same bass sound used by a band called Berlin in the 80s in their song Take My Breath Away, which sounds a bit like this. You'll remember. Coming in. It's very deep, very warm, and it has a long envelope. For the rhythmic component, I'm going to start with the bass drum and just put a basic bass drum rhythm down. And I'm thinking of going with something like this. Okay, so I put a bass down and I put the bass drum feel down, and let's just hear what it sounds like together. Added a bit more of a hi-hat to it. And so the building goes on. Okay, so let's talk about the melody of the song. I thought I would try a kind of a jazzy, guitar-y kind of sound. Not trying to emulate a real jazz guitar sound, or like acoustic and real, but just suggest that kind of sort of that kind of a mood, if you like, a sort of ECM kind of sound. So I chose a Native Instruments jazzy guitar sound, and I put it through a lot of chorus and delay and reverb and made it all mushy and sweet, and it sounds like this. Now if I play you the original piano part, you can hear the melody being suggested. So obviously I work with that. That's the idea. I'm also hearing that the song can be very rich with lots of pads. The first pad I've chosen is from Steinberg's Pad Shop, and it sounds like this. Another pad I'm using is from a real great old bread and butter machine sitting over here, and it's called a Roland JV 1080. If you ever find one second hand going cheap, buy it. It's real, a lot of very, very nice sounds. Another pad I'm using comes off my go-to pad machine called the Roland JD800. So it's all about blending and layering these textures. I'm also thinking there can be lots of arpeggiated loops in this piece. I like to play them myself. That's using the UVI workstation plugin. I also have a very nice plugin called Podolsky, which has some nice arpeggiations on it. Here's the one I'm using on the track. As I said before, the original guide piano was just scaffolding, and so ultimately I removed that And I'm just using a nice Rhodes electric piano using Steinberg's Halion Sonic SE3. Because my productions consist of a lot of MIDI input data, a lot of computerized plug-in sounds, a lot of synthesizers and keyboards, I always like to try and find some live elements to put into the track. It's either bringing a guitar player in to strum some acoustic guitar, and when I've got nobody around, like now under lockdown, then a good old tambourine is a great help. The elements I've included are a overdrive guitar, kind of power chord sound using Halion, a bit of Hammond organ from Native Instruments Contact, and then I've got a really great go-to old plugin called Superwave P8. It's been around for ages, but it's got some really nice old school sort of Roland Juno-y kind of sounds, and I'm using that for some arpeggiations as well. So just to finally recap, I've taken you through the process from conception, sketching, laying foundations, building, putting up scaffolding, taking down scaffolding. Be patient, take your time, try things, leave things overnight, come back the next day, and just slowly sculpt away at your piece until you feel you're happy to do a final mix and release it. So I hope this has helped you. Let's hear where we ended up.